Okay, wow. That was a journey. I'm sorry you guys got to watch all that. Hey, I'm just shocked we got it to work, all right? So, just a very quick explanation. Normally we do this on Bevy, which is a different virtual platform. Today, because we're actually in the tower, Salesforce runs on Google Meet, so we had to switch last second to Google Meet. And on top of that, because we were a little worried that we actually had more than 300 RSVPs, we had to try to find a Google Meet that would allow that many people to actually attend. So that was part of the whole struggle today. Hopefully we have a lot of people coming in as they get the email. Shyam, if you could let Jacob know just to blast an email with this Google Meet, that would be great, just to tell people where we're coming. And now we're recording. We've got our beautiful guests up front and center. I'm going to show just a quick few slides about the Slack community in New York. We have more folks coming in as we speak, and we're all very excited that you guys can make it here today. So actually, show of hands, and I know no one can see the audience online, but show of hands in here. Has anyone been to the Salesforce Tower before? All right, we have a few. Great. Well, welcome to the Salesforce Tower. As most of you know, Salesforce and Slack are one in one. So thank you to the Salesforce team for giving us a space to actually host this event. This is the first time. Okay, I guess a good question. First time we were hosted in the Salesforce Tower? Yes. All right. Checkbox. We did it. This was a very difficult space to get, so thank you again for showing up. And with that, we're going to start with Slack for customer support leaders. We're going to be interviewing some of our guests up front, and I will start this presentation. So we're joined today by our chapter leaders as well. Thank you, Kana, for bringing the cookies. Thank you, Shyam, for handling the flyers while I'm up here on stage. I appreciate all of that. If you guys aren't yet part of the Slack community, please go ahead and join. You probably joined as part of the event, but we also have a channel inside of our Slack workspace called #MembersNYC. We'd love to, if you have any photos that you could take from today, we'd love to get some shots of us from down here. As well as even asking us or telling us what kind of events you would like to see as well about Slack. So we really drive all these community events from feedback from the teams that we support, and anything that you guys post in there, we'll go ahead and respond to. For anyone online, this is actually how to join the Slack community. So you probably received a few emails. Feel free to send this to your friends. Feel free to send some photos, but the best way to do it is to find that email that you got when you originally joined, click the Join Us in Slack, and then find the #MembersNYC channel. So that is the easiest way to go and find us in the Slack workspace. We're there all the time, kind of asking and posting about events that are coming up. My name is Zach Hotoff. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called TightKnit. We build a platform for building communities on top of Slack. So very apt, given that we're here. I'll be the moderator today. I'm also based in New York City here. And we're going to be joined by our esteemed guest, Gaynes from FINA, which is Slack for customer support. Sara Dillon, who just started her job at Bryd, and she actually used to work at Slack in mostly enterprise sales. And then Dilthey, head of support at Clay, who just raised a Series B, and we'll be talking to them a little bit about that as well. So with that, we're going to begin. I'm going to actually go back to this slide so you guys have something beautiful to look at behind them, but we'll get going. So, I love to start it out with the easiest question of them all, but what is your favorite Slack emoji? And it can be a custom emoji, it can be a standard emoji, but we want to hear what is that emoji and why. And you know what, we'll start actually with Georgie down at the end, and we'll work our way backwards. And while you're doing that, give a little intro about yourself. I know I briefly introduced you, but talk a bit about your day-to-day and the company that you're part of.
Yeah, for sure. Hey everyone, I'm George. Before I forget, my favorite emoji is probably the upside down face. I just feel like that's like my constant place of being. I work at Clay. I head up our support team. So we've got a team of 8 now. We just hired a couple of more, and we're hiring pretty rapidly. Clay is sort of a creative tool for go-to-market. And so I actually started there about 4 months ago. And before that, I was heading up support team at Mutiny, another startup, the website optimization. So yeah, pretty good to be here.
Great. And hi, I'm Sara, and I'm, yes, now the new Director of Sales at Bryd. And before that, I was at Slack for almost 3 years. But Bryd is a global Slack consultancy. And so we're helping Slack folks with professional services, managed services, and building custom apps in dev. And our two co-founders are also ex-Slack as well. And my favorite emoji, it's gotta be the blobs. And there's a specific blob, if you use these, where they're high-fiving each other, and it's great.
Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Jared. I lead growth at a company called Thina. We are the world's best modern B2B support tool for companies that live and connect with their customers in Slack. My favorite emoji, since we're keeping this theme to CS folks and support folks, are can be called cool crying, which is it's the regular cool face with the sunglasses, but there's tears streaming down, which if you've ever worked in CS means even when you're not feeling so great, we put on a smile for our customers.
Amazing. All right, well, we're going to start it, and we'll even take some time to ask some questions from the audience. If you guys have any, please feel free to write them down. But we're going to start with some common questions that we're going to ask everybody. And the first one we're going to start with is actually, what features in Slack make it a powerful customer support platform? And so we'll work our way backwards now. We'll start with you, Jared.
Yeah, so I've actually been using Slack as a support tool for my entire career. And I started my career in customer support at a very technical product. And it was pretty much a rule of thumb that we would start a Slack Connect channel with every single customer that we signed. So the process was deal closes, immediately the first thing every single time was to spin up a Slack Connect. There were a few reasons we did that. One was because it helped us build just a much stronger partnership with the customer. A lot of the time, if you're emailing back and forth with a customer, it doesn't really feel like a partnership. It feels like more of a vendor-client relationship. One of the things we noticed when we started doing this in 2018, 2019, when even before Slack Connect, when we were doing this as like adding single channel guests into Slack channels, what we noticed was, one, it made us feel like kind of a closer together partnership, because we had access to our customers in the same place that we had access to our colleagues. And it kind of moved the relationship from just a formal kind of vendor-client relationship to one of true partners, and sometimes even a lot of the time a friendship. And so it gave us kind of a level of access that we didn't have before when we didn't use Slack for this purpose. And another thing it was really good at was live troubleshooting and brainstorming. And so if you know this about Slack, obviously you've got threads for different things. You can put in code snippets. It's easier to share files. But when you're doing this internally, it was great because you could troubleshoot really quickly and get to the bottom of something. And then in the past, you would then have to go back to email and go back to this world of like this siloed communication with your customers, or maybe things were in tickets. And it was just a lot faster in Slack with your colleagues and then a lot slower with your customers. So what we did was we ended up just bringing all of our customers into Slack. And then when we had to do things like, hey, can you send us what you're seeing? Or, hey, can you send us this quick code snippet? It ended up getting so much faster and more effective that we just never went back. And so that's what, for as long as I can remember in the world of customer success, I did. And that's what Thina kind of helps to supercharge when you're starting to do that a lot more with your customers.
Cool. And I'm going to throw you the same question, Sarah, find out more about what you think, because you have the perspective of like being the one who actually sold Slack for some of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything that Jared said. And just to add more on top of that, the institutional knowledge that's collected in Slack is huge, right? Like if you can share more information in public channels and make that accessible to your entire organization, that also helps folks better be able to, go straight into Slack, search for what they need. And as a salesperson at Slack and now at Bryd, I could go and surface information to help a customer before they necessarily had to go through our typical support channels. But then also just, again, like grow stronger relationships there, especially with folks who are connected through Slack Connect. And at Slack, I probably opened a total of 3 emails a week because we just had everybody moving through Slack. It was lovely.
We'll send that last one to you.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually just, our co-founder just, we had our all hands yesterday, and he reminded us that we still have to respond to emails because we're such a Slack focused, focused community. But yeah, I think for me, there's sort of two main things that I think make Slack perfect for customer success. It's sort of just like the data architecture of a thread is very in tune with how we like to support customers, and that it's very much just like, you know, a conversation or a ticket, and then you have that sort of contextual conversation there. And I think that just lines up so nicely with you know, being able to support customers. But I think the other thing is you know, less of a Slack feature, but just its ubiquity. I think it's so helpful. You know, all the things that Jared and Sara talked about is just, we can do this because everybody is on Slack, and all of our customers are on Slack, and so it just makes it a really seamless, easy way to sort of meet them where they are and be able to connect with them in a tool that they're already using.
Cool. And I'm actually going to just follow up with that. You know, I love to build in Slack communities, right? Like, I'm all focused on how does a team actually use community to actually grow their customer base, and Clay is like the ultimate example of that. And you're even mentioning it's like in the co-founder DNA that everything points back to Slack. So kind of as a follow-up, like, your team is very community first. And as you guys have started to scale, like, what are the advantages of that community support really versus, and we'll come back to it as well with Slack Connect, but like the one-to-one Slack Connect support?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting because we're sort of playing with both models, right? We're sort of able to support our customers in this community-based thing, which we've grown to, I think it's over 12,000 now. We've grown it pretty rapidly, and way before I started at Clay, it was sort of like you mentioned, a core tenet of what our founders wanted to do was really build this community up to be a really sort of powerful driver for you know, and lead generation and all of that. And so I think that our sort of advantage there is that we're able to support our customers and meet them where they are, but also it sort of allows them to support each other too, which I think is a really important piece of it, is that not only can they go back and search the history of it or whatever it might be, but they can also help each other out and sometimes get back to each other faster than, you know, our support team is able to work. So I think that, you know, that's sort of the community-based thing. And then as we start to go up market and build out, you know, some enterprise-focused, you know, motions, we're able to sort of take the same model and push that over to some of our higher touch customers and have those direct Slack Connect channels and be able to continue sort of like the same support that we're offering on both sides of the house. And it just makes it pretty seamless and pretty easy for us.
No, I think that makes sense. And yeah, like, we're going to actually take it to you, Jared, because I think you'll be able to give us kind of the dichotomy of like what it looks like to have community-based support, where it's like everybody is seeing the same question and others can even jump in to answer those questions, right? So you're able to use like your champions, which I've seen Clay, you know, you guys are building agencies even around Clay that want to show they know what they're talking about, and they jump in and answer questions just to be able to demonstrate that. And then on the opposite side, right, Slack Connect is a great way to like bring in many different people. And I'll let you kind of talk more about that, because that is the bread and butter, I think, with Tina.
Sure. Yeah. So I would even go as far to say that if you're working in sales or post-sales and you're not actively trying to get the folks who you're talking to in Slack, then you're probably doing your job wrong. And I think there's two main ways to do this. So as you know, George talking about, one is community, which is I'm going to create a big channel and I'm going to have everyone using my product to just join that channel, and they can talk, share best practices, ask questions. And lots of companies use that as kind of a proxy to customer support, because it's really easy to see what other folks are asking. Maybe they help each other. Maybe someone from, you know, Clay will jump in and help other members of the community. And the other model is kind of for more high touch white glove service, which is just creating individualized Slack Connect channels for each of your customers. And so what Athena is we're a platform that basically takes that model, which is I need to be creating Slack channels with customers, whether it be community or dedicated. And we make it so that anytime a customer asks something, it automatically creates a ticket. And so what this allows us to do is we went from a world where lots of companies were doing this, but they had no way to track and manage what was being said in Slack, and things would get lost, things would slip through the cracks. We noticed when you get to probably around 25 Slack Connect channels, that's kind of the breaking point of, okay, 25 channels, like 10 plus things coming in every day, I'm probably going to lose some things. That's usually when folks will start to explore tools like Athena, which are purpose built for Slack Connect. And so everything's tracked, everything's organized, tickets are created automatically, and it allows you to go from, hey, I have all these channels with my customers, but I still have to manually create Zendesk tickets or Freshdesk tickets, platform of choice, right? To, okay, I have all these channels with customers, and Athena, anytime they ask something, creates a ticket. And so we kind of see ourselves as the quote unquote modern support tool, because all of these old kind of legacy support tooling systems like Zendesk, as an example, they built their infrastructure on top of email. And email, as we're talking about today, is sort of an outdated way of communicating with your customers, right? It's siloed, so you can't tap people in and out of threads. It's slow. People are less comfortable replying quickly, and also it's much more formalized. And people are moving a lot more towards both Slack communities and Slack Connect channels. And so just like these old platforms like Zendesk are built on email, Athena is built on top of Slack, whether that be community or Connect.
Amazing. And now we're going to get the Slack take on it, because I think you're sitting in the middle, just aptly between the Connect side and the community side. So that was a happen chance placement. But what does Slack think about customer support? Because I mean, Slack has had to do customer support since day one.
Yep.
And like part of the problem is probably couldn't even use everything that Slack has to offer today to solve customer support then. So like what was Slack doing to even just dog food its product, or even develop internal tools that would just make Slack better from a customer support side?
Yeah. That's a great question. And yes, Slack for service, Slack for customer support has always been a huge area of focus at Slack. And when I was selling at Slack, there were 3 key buckets that we really paid attention to. So first off, how are we helping support teams resolve issues faster, right? So how are we best connecting people, data, your processes within Slack? And then second, really looking at how can we also improve the agent experience. And so with that, I mean, we know like how difficult it can be for these agents to have to solve these customer issues day after day. Sometimes there's repeatable customer issues that can be surfaced via Slack as we're talking through different channels and collecting that institutional knowledge. So yeah, how can we make the agent experience better? Also through some of the tools like huddles on Slack, or just being able to better connect with your teams and collaborate. And then the third bucket would really be around how can we then improve the customer experience. And that's a lot of what we're already saying as far as Slack Connect goes, and how we create better experiences for our customers, not only being able to, of course, solve issues faster by having the right people and the right apps connected to Slack. But then if you are having external communications with these customers, how can you glean some more feedback and insights from those conversations to, yes, improve your organization's support model? So those are the 3 key buckets that Slack is really looking at. And what I really like about Slack too is they absolutely will test features internally first, because if Slack is going to present a solution to their customers, they are going to make sure that they like the solution as well. So for example, shortly before I left Slack earlier this year, we had access to Slack AI for months ahead of that launch. And so for the customer support team specifically, sometimes when you have these channels and threads going in Slack, and you have, say, a thread with a customer issue that has maybe like 50 to 100 different responses, right? How can you go in there and get a quick recap via AI to quickly get up to speed on that particular issue? Or for searchability purposes, what if I can go into Slack and see, who is an expert on Slack user authentication, right? These are all features that Slack had tested out well before launching. So absolutely, dog fooding solutions before releasing them is a huge practice at Slack.
And I'm going to ask you a follow-up on AI, but before I do, another shout out about the community is one of the best ways to get into a pilot is actually within the community. So a lot of the product managers are in the Slack community asking folks to join. And if you're interested in joining those pilots, feel free to jump into the community and follow along. So, but going back to AI, I mean, I think customer support and AI are probably, we just see a lot of news about it, right? Like, how do I solve the menial questions, the ones in the Clay community that are asked hundreds of times, the ones that are asked in multiple different Slack Connect channels, and how do I get those out of the way so I can answer the more meaningful questions. Like I'm actually going to ask a different question, not about Slack, but really more about like what makes Slack the best company to tackle this particular problem. And I think I'll put that to you. Like why in Slack, and maybe I'll ask everybody, why does Slack have the opportunity better than say other platforms to solve this problem? Whether it's Slack themselves or an external tool.
Yeah, I would say first thing that's coming to mind, just the amount of time that your Slack users are spending in Slack per day. I don't know if you've run the data on that, but the amount of time that we're actually connected and living in Slack and bringing different pieces of data and processes into Slack, that really sets up the tool well to be able to then use AI to glean more insights from that data. And even as you start to see Slack continue to evolve and add more solutions like Canvas and Slack lists, it's just, bringing more utilizations into the platform.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm hyper focused on this quarter is AI, and one of the sort of things that we're trying to do is to create basically a new knowledge base, new docs to support that. I think that we're trying to use AI to deflect more of our tickets, and that's really difficult when we don't have good content to sort of feed the AI. And I think one of the things that we've been thinking about is that, we're doing a lot of this content creation and sort of thinking about it intentionally, but there's also just a wealth of stuff that we already have in Slack because we have this large community, we have people talking about Clay, we have people answering questions and things like that. And I think that there's definitely, a world where we can start to sort of like use that as context for the AI and just make our AI that much better. And again, trying to focus more on some of those low-hanging, menial questions that we can have our team then focus on the more like, sort of consultancy type questions that they're thinking through in Slack. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
I'll just add, one of the most common things I feel like we can probably all relate to is if we don't know the answer to something, we're probably command F-ing that question in Slack. And so one of the things that Athena and probably a lot of other companies are focused on is we know the answer to pretty much everything is in Slack because someone has probably answered that before, a lot of the time with a customer. And so how do we curate that, right? How do we make it so that all of those answers, we don't have to search through these hundreds of channels, find which channel it may have been asked in, command F. So one of the things that Athena is doing actually with our own AI product is training our models on previous Slack interactions so that when the next question comes in that may have been asked once or 10 times before, we can really easily curate those responses, train our model, and then write up a first draft of the response. And I think lots of other companies are probably also focused on how can we get all this data that lives in Slack and use it for training.
And it's the most up to date, right? Like that's the beauty of Slack is that when things change, we all know like no one jumps right into the knowledge base and updates it immediately. That's just sadly not the case of product teams kind of today. So Slack really is like kind of the continuous source of true knowledge, right?
Yeah, I can even say an anecdote, which was at a previous company I worked at, we had sort of a Google document of common questions and answers that we tried to keep up to date, right? And it was supposed to be our source of truth, and it eventually devolved to just check Slack. And I think that's probably common because Slack, you don't actually have to update anything that's living and breathing because Slack is just that, right? It's a living, breathing source of truth for everything that's discussed, including lots of common questions and problems and solutions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's like part, I think, of the core identity of Slack, right? Searchable log of all content and knowledge. So what if that's true? We don't really know. It should have been made up after the fact, but I think it makes a ton of sense to use AI to like surface more information. All right, so we've talked about how Slack is really amazing. Now we're going to actually talk about what are the things that we would do better if we could go and talk to the Slack product team to make it better for customer support. So I don't know who is jumping at the bit on that one. I'm waiting at whoever's eyes are glowing. I'm going to you, George. I think you're the one ready for this one.
Yeah, so. I don't know. I mean, I think that, obviously there's a lot of things, right? I think the big thing that I've always wanted or hoped for was sort of like broadcast messaging and being able to sort of like, as we start to build out, multiple channels for all of our customers. There's a couple of ways that we can sort of like broadcast out messaging, but something sort of built in, I think, would be, it's just a really, neat way. I think community-based Peter back there who's heading up our community, it's very easy to post in our announcements channel and sort of any number of people will see that. But when we start getting to, broken up channels per customer, it's a little bit more difficult to sort of have that one-to-many conversation. And I think that there's sort of an opportunity there to make that whole process a little easier.
And I'm going to actually target you on this one, Sarah. Enterprise grid, I've gotten like some thoughts on that of like how, it's both easy, it's great and hard, right? Like it's not completely simple for a lot of Slack admins to just move into enterprise grid and handle, potentially thousands of customer support agents that are now asking each other's questions across multiple workspaces.
Yep.
Like, is there anything that Slack could do, you think, to make just the admin experience better to like help up level for other customers? That's a tough question, I know.
It's a great question because there's so much that you can do with the platform and especially on a grid. So yeah, there's a plethora of like resources for admins, and there's many different roles at that as well living on grid. So outside of just your admin role, you have, your admin roles for compliance or for user groups or for channels. So there's a lot to it. If anything, I think that more so, organizations need to also think about the learning and enablement portion. So not only designing Slack in a very thoughtful way based on your business strategy, but also, looking at who are going to be the stakeholders across IT, security, communications to then better enable some of these features from the admin perspective, because there is a lot there and it's a lot for, one or two admins to take on their own. To set up a successful Slack instance and grid, I think it really takes somebody from every business unit to really come up with the best design. I actually have a customer who told me that they don't have a Slack strategy. They have a business strategy, and Slack fits into, almost all of it.
Could you tell us more on that? I think we all perked up when you said that. What does that mean when you say Slack strategy aligns with a business strategy?
Yep, exactly. So when you're really thinking about like a thoughtful Slack workspace to build, whether you're building a single workspace or a multi-workspace, grid architecture, really looking at your business goals across, again, your largest business units, and really picking your key stakeholders and finding out, what do I want to get out of Slack that supports customer support, right? What are these key business initiatives, for example, resolving issues faster. So then once you start to look at how Slack can support that specific business outlook, that's a better way to fit Slack into your strategy for the entire organization.
And I know Thina is actually solving some of these problems already in Slack. If you could just choose the two that you feel like make Thina like the thing that Slack doesn't do, I would love to learn more about that.
Yeah, so the great thing about building on top of Slack is Slack has really, really good APIs, which means if Slack doesn't do something, we can probably figure out a way to build something that does that thing, right? So just like George mentioned, broadcasting, right? That's like, I have 100 customers in 100 different Slack channels, and I could copy and paste the same message to all of them. That was actually one of the first products that Thina built, which was a broadcaster for many to one Slack messages. And we're hoping it'll eventually replace things like B2B email marketing, because what we noticed is people spend way more time in Slack than they do in email, and things like these really nice templated messages that are sent across Slack we did a test, something like 8x the conversion and the visibility that email does, because almost no one will go into email and click into something, read the whole thing, but you'll notice in Slack, not only will they read it, they'll tag people in it, they'll react to it, and they'll engage with it in ways that just aren't possible in other tools like email marketing. And so that was one of the first things we built. And I'd say there's a couple other things when people are thinking about, okay, doing customer support in Slack that kind of scares them. The biggest one is I don't want to give my customers such infinite access to me, basically, right? Because if you're in Slack with your customers, you got your shared channel, obviously, but then they've got you in DMs too. And so sometimes people are like, wait, let's push the brakes. I'm not sure if I want to do this because what if my customers just ping me all the time? And so one of the other things Athena does is we help create restrictions, like you can set working hours for Slack so that if customers reach out outside of your working hours, they get a nice little automated response. Another thing that Athena does is we only work in public Slack channels and we work in shared Slack channels, not in DMs. So if any time my customer DMs me with something support related, I can just respond and say, hey, thanks for your question. Please repost it in our channel. And it helps to create these kind of policies and restrictions, whatever you want to call it, so that they don't always have what people think is like kind of unlimited access to you, but really they're allowed to post in the channel. And if it's during business hours, we'll reply. If not, we'll reply to the next day. And these are just some of the things that Athena has started to build in order to put not as much restrictions, but just organization in place. So it's not kind of like the Wild West where you're getting pinged in your DMs all day, every day by your customers.
And I'm going to add one because I always like to push the Slack team on this too. But for me, I'm mostly thinking from a business perspective around building a community. Like that's the thing, like as a person building a platform for Slack communities, Slack is just not built business-wise for kind of communities that are kind of growing really quickly. And I used to work at Salesforce on the community cloud, right? That's a very different payment structure than the way Salesforce operates today. So finding something that Slack could work with, I think would help the Clay team, it would help the Athena team, it would help really every team, including myself. So that's the one. If any Slack GTM leaders are listening, please pay attention. Well, great. I think so. Just as a heads up, we are gonna do this for another 10 minutes. Then we're gonna open up for questions. So if you guys have any more questions, if you don't have any questions, go eat a cookie and then go eat a cookie. But we're gonna move on to, I think, kind of a fun one, more about like customer experience, customer support, out of Slack entirely. But like, what does customer experience do to actually differentiate a brand? And I know we're gonna start with you, George, with Clay, because I think at the very get-go, right, customer support was the center of it. Your whole product, every time you run into a problem, points customers to the community. It doesn't point them to an email. It doesn't point them to a knowledge center. It really uses Slack communities as the centerpiece to say, how do we push great customer support that's immediate, that's fast, and anything else?
Yeah, no, for sure. I was just having a conversation with Hussam for the VP of support at Rippling, and he was telling me that it's actually really difficult to go the other way. So if you start off with a support team that is not great, and you're not giving a great response time, or you're not giving great answers, it's really hard to switch that over and become known for having a good brand. And so I think that at Clay in particular, we sort of understood that, and we started having really good response times and making sure that we're helping our customers, and it really has become sort of like a core part of our brand, and our my co-founder Varun is always having me on getting our response times back down and making sure that we're sort of giving really stellar support. And I think that also sort of plays into how we hire as well. We're really looking to hire stellar people onto our support team rather than what I think is often a popular option of outsourcing or whatever it might be. And we're really using it as sort of a centerpiece to our entire customer experience, and to understand that will pay dividends down the road. And we're pretty excited about the sort of model that we're building up.
Right, and then kind of sending it to both you guys, I think in terms of like helping your clients like deliver that same level of customer support. What is, when, let's actually start with Athena. When Athena comes out into a company, what are those success metrics that you see that maybe are even beyond the CS side?
Yeah, I think things like response time, resolution time, of course, are really important. What I personally emphasize, though, is kind of the relationship building aspect. So I mentioned this earlier, kind of coming off as more of a partner rather than just a vendor-client relationship. An easy trick I use in Slack especially is I'll just start kind of side DMs with all of our points of contact, unrelated to work, but it's such an easy way to just build rapport, which isn't really possible without Slack. And so, just the other day we signed a big account. we're pushing for adoption. It's going to take a while. And I noticed one of our primary stakeholders in her Slack profile picture, it's like her and her puppy. So of course I started a side DM asking all about her dog, and now we're friends. And it's something that's really hard to do in the world of email or phone or just really any other communication channel that's not Slack specific. And it's sort of something that I try to do early and often, just in terms of using DMs and the other things that Slack makes available to you in order to build that rapport to then, leverage that to improve customer experience and just create good relationships.
Amazing. And yeah, we'll throw it to you, Sarah, to kind of close us out on that one.
Yeah.
You work in a really broad variety of like use cases. Are there any, actually I'll spin it to you, are there any industries that you see that are like the ones that are most right to kind of pick up and lift with Slack?
Yeah. Well, tech is going to be the first industry that comes to mind. That's just an easier one for Slack, and especially since Slack is a technology company, and then itself to mirror that within other companies. And then Bryd is already working with a lot of tech organizations across small to medium to large size business. And as we even scale, I wanted to note on a couple pieces here, which George mentioned, like scaling and just making sure that you set up the foundation correctly from the start, just to continue to build a good CS experience. And so Bryd has actually created our own onboarding bot, for example, so that when new members come in to the organization, we can automate all these different steps to make a good onboarding experience over the first couple of months. And that's also something that we mirror for our customers as well, right? So helping build these experiences within Bryd and then expand to our customers. And then again, just keeping all of our knowledge within an external channel with the customer, as Jared has been pointing out a lot, and then also having our own project channels internally, just to make sure that we have both an internal conversation around our customers as well as that external facing channel. But yep.
Cool. Well, in the last few minutes, just because as a huge thank you for you all coming up here, I'd love to give you guys 60 seconds just to kind of explain what each of your teams is doing now and like what you're all looking for in terms of like next steps. So we'll work our way backwards then. We'll start with you, Jared, and we'll go back to George.
Sure. So what we're doing in terms of,
give us what does the next year look like for Thena? Like why should anyone in the audience go check out Thena later?
Cool. So Thena, we actually started out as just a support layer for Slack and pretty much had to use Slack Connect with companies in order to get value out of Thena, which is, mostly still the case, but we're expanding now to channels like email and live chat. And the goal is pull everything into Slack. So even if it doesn't start in Slack, we know that everyone lives there. So if you get an email, we want that to get pulled in Slack. If you get sort of a live chat from a customer on your site, we want that to get pulled in Slack. What we notice is people live in Slack a huge percentage of the time. And kind of like what I think George said at the beginning, our kind of philosophy is meet your customers where they are. So you're usually in Slack, they might be all over the place. And our goal is to connect to as many channels as possible so that when your customers are trying to get a hold of you, you can reply to them as quickly as possible, which in turn will help strengthen relationships, avoid churn, increase upsells, and a whole lot of other value adds. So that's Thena's philosophy and goal moving forward.
Great. And I know Bryd is 10x in terms of size in the last year. So I'd love to learn more about what the team is looking like over the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. So over the last year, our two co-founders, as I had mentioned earlier, are ex-Slack, and they decided to start up Bryd because they saw this area where there's not a lot of Slack-specific partners in the ecosystem. And so here we have Slack that has evolved and has so many new features, like we were saying with Canvas, Slack AI, lists. And so really we need to start looking at how can we better partner with Slack customers, but then also with the ecosystem in general, just to build better experiences for Slack. And so we are helping folks with design, implementation, as I mentioned, managed services. If your team doesn't have the bandwidth to be able to maintain Slack, because also the maintenance is quite a lift at times. And then also, as I mentioned, the onboarding bot, we also do a lot of custom work with apps. And then just a lot of custom development work in general. So I think having that Slack history across, our growing organization, a combined 10 years of experience, and now moving into this consulting space as partners, we're just really excited to see how many, different organizations we can touch.
All right, George, big Series B. That's a lot of pressure, and not a small Series B either, a massive one. What is next for Clay in terms of go-to-market?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that the biggest thing, specific to support especially, is just that we're growing a lot. We're, like I mentioned, we have 8 people now, and we're planning to double the team by the end of the year and probably triple by mid next year. And so I think for us, as we start to think about this sort of, new model for support and how we're sort of like bringing up this team, being able to sort of grow through those growing pains, and be able to sort of continue supporting our customers, really well. And I think, one of the big challenges that we're sort of working through right now is sort of, making sure that everything that we've sort of built from the beginning, that community and that really strong sort of, community that we have now, continues to sort of scale with the company, and figuring out how to sort of continue doing that while also making sure that we're able to support our customers. I think there's some really unique challenges as we sort of build through this sort of new age of support, and it's pretty exciting. We're pretty pumped for it.
Amazing. Well, I'll give my quick little pitch just to close it out. But if anyone's building a Slack community, please come chat with me. If you want to try to drive these community spaces like Clay that are growing and using customers to interact with each other, we'd love to chat, because we are building tight-knit, all-in-one community platform on Slack. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Anyone online, I'm going to first take a few questions in the room, but please post them in the chat in Google Meet. We'd love to take a few from the folks online. We've had, I think, about 60 people stay most of the time. I think it's starting to trickle down, so phenomenal attendance. And actually, before we do that, let's give a round of applause. So I saw a few of you taking notes. Oh, perfect. We've already got a hand. Let's jump in.
Hi, I'm Heidi. I'm the customer support success manager at Limitless. I actually have one of our favorite customers here. My question, so I run everything customer facing. So like all the intercom messages coming in, our Slack community, and we try to make our B2C Slack, our B2C product, not have the Slack be support, but to preface. And right now our product is kind of in a bumpy spot, not doing so hot in terms of quality or reliability. And that is very much reflected in the Slack community. So my question is, any tips, besides DMing one-on-one, which I think is a great way to build rapport with users, any tips for turning on the sentiment when we are going through the transition period?
So you said you're trying to avoid the support inside the community?
Well, we've never wanted our Slack community to be support. Like, we want it to be one-on-one, like email us. We actually want it to be more technical, send us logs, gets pretty detailed there. But I guess just like, other than using it as a support channel, anyways, to
sort of,
because I feel like actually if we were to make it a support channel, it'd be worse.
Why is that?
Because then it's every user's experience is so different and specific. Maybe there's one person experiencing a bug and maybe like 10 others experiencing the same, but like for the most part, they're still pretty specific.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sort of depends on what your support really looks like. I mean, if it's it sounds like maybe it's more focused on the bug experience, and that can sometimes be a little bit harder to expose. But I think that a lot of the times we also really like to lean into transparency, and we recognize that when something happens, an incident or a bug or whatever it might be, that people are probably going to see it whether they say something or not. Yeah. And we really sort of like lean into that. We're posting announcements when the app goes down, incidents happen, and I think everybody sort of understands that to a certain extent. And so we really try to lean into that and I think having support inside Slack can actually sometimes help with that transparency motion too, because we're very transparent with our customers. I don't know why this happened. Let me ask the team. Or, this was a bug. We're so sorry. We charged you a bunch of credits that we shouldn't have charged you. Like, that stuff is all public and everybody can see that. And we just sort of lean into that, knowing that that's sort of the reality of things. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah. And I can say that most of the issues are bugs. And so that's, I feel like, why we don't want it to be a support want Slack to be the support channel.
It's definitely tough.
I'd also add, so transparency, I was going to say the same thing. Something we do is we're very intentional about when we're pushing fixes or new releases, being very open and upfront about all of those. And so, we're a startup too. We're not perfect. We run into bugs. And what we do try to emphasize though is that when we turn them around quickly, we make it very visible. So even though users may be flagging certain things aren't working, whatever it might be, we're constantly recording looms. And we're constantly making announcements in these Slack channels to show what we've changed, what we've improved, to show that we're listening. And as someone who's worked in support for a long time, when users, especially these end users, when they feel heard, that's probably the first step to kind of unwinding some of this, especially if it's, a series of things that have been not so great from a product standpoint. And the best way, in my opinion, to make them feel heard is to show them that you're taking their feedback, you're making changes, and making those types of announcements in Slack have, for us, been really effective.
Cool. All right, we'll move on to the next question.
Can I piggyback off that?
Please,
Thing
go
for a
on.
sec? So, well, first of all, thank you all, and I can't wait to look at all of your companies and learn more about everything. But going off what you're saying, we took a very high school approach. You have hall monitors. We assign people to be Slack channel monitors, where it's your responsibility at scheduled times to be on these Slack channels for these priorities for these clients. That definitely helped us. It's a very crude way of solving the problem, but it makes people feel heard, and it gives both sides kind of urgency to keep communicating and keep even if you're not fixing problems or you're noting bugs or how many come in or reporting tickets or whatever you need to do. So that's kind of what we do. But I'm interested to look at Athena and see how that could help what we're trying to do too.
Yeah, just a quick plug there. We built something that we call triage channel, which means you don't have to monitor individual channels. You just monitor one and everything comes into there from customers. So that's a super common problem actually without tools like Athena that you run into, which is you've got 50 channels. Someone's got to be watching each of them at all times.
Yes.
And that was one of the first things that we built to solve some of those challenges.
Cool. Well, we have a few questions online, so I am going to jump onto those. And we're building on another question. Wow. So we're continuously building, but I'm happy with the channels I'm using for direct support, but I'm interested in ways Slack can help with back-end processes. Do you have experience or recommendations for how Slack can be leveraged for admin or operational work? I think this one's perfect for you, Sarah. You want me to repeat it?
It's not to be leveraged for admin.
Admin or operational work. So more, how do I take Slack and make it a machine essentially for my internal workflows for actually developing a powerful customer support org, even if I have other customer support tools already.
Okay, so you're saying internal facing.
Yeah, I'm extrapolating on behalf of Alexandra, but more asking how do I do the admin and operational stuff for a large customer support team?
Okay. And it sounded like the person asking the question has good channels set up, but I was thinking of naming conventions first off, because in Slack, we were always using naming conventions like please-admin or help-admin. So if you're looking for a request, or if you're looking to just ask a question, then you can start to plug in more workflows. So when it comes to using Slack for workflows, either using the no-code workflow builder to create forms that you can access in your channels to fill out, the information. Like if you are trying to make a request for, I don't know, a new user license for a piece of technology, for example. Or if you're going rather to a help channel to ask a question. So then it's a workflow with a simple flow to ask a question that will be posted. And then if there's common questions with the triaging, it's easy to then field and answer those questions as well. But I hope that's getting close to answering that question. But Any
Yeah.
other thoughts from you?
Yeah, I can tap into that because I think that one of the things that I've sort of figured out as I've been building this support org a little bit, that we as a company are working in Slack. And so one of the things that I try to do a lot is to make it easier to sort of centralize the conversation there. So, if our support team is working in intercom and our engineers are working in linear, but there needs to be a lot of communication between the two, Slack becomes that sort of perfect backend process to be able to facilitate that. And then, so how can we make sure that all three of these systems are sort of centralized in one place and all of these conversations are happening in one place? And I think that, being able to set those things up, again, you mentioned the Slack API, and becomes, very, very easy to make sure that everything's sort of centralized in one place and everyone feels kind of supported and whatever it could be.
And I'm even going to give a little weird pitch for how AI is going to get involved here. Like when we use ChatGPT, it's a one-on-one conversation. When we use Slack, it's a conversation with all our peers. So from an ability for an AI to come in and understand everyone's context and every tool's context all in one place and still be conversational, I think there's going to be some incredible stuff that comes out of like really the hub of your workplace operations that is a conversational interface. So I think there's going to be some really cool stuff from all of our teams coming to us. All right, next question from online. If anyone wants to take the final question in the room after this one, please start thinking about it. But recently adopted Slack with a couple hundred users in a tech support context. Huge adoption rate, lots of great content being created. The question is, with the sheer volume of content that can get generated, is there an effective strategy for turning content into knowledge base articles at scale? I would very much like to turn Slack into a knowledge base generating machine. Just haven't figured out how to do that yet.
$1 million idea. Haven't done it yet.
Yeah. I mean, I know there are some teams that are doing similar things. I've even been asked, like, what does it look like with an AI bot answering every single question? And I'll give you the pros and the cons. The pros is it can answer the really menial questions. When it gets hard, it gets it wrong almost every time, and you'll have to bring in support, and you could even hurt some trust. The other problem that I have found is that it ruins like the opportunity for like a champion to come in and actually answer the question on your behalf, right? Like going back to Clay's use case of having the agencies come in and say, like, hey, I know how to do this. You ruin that now because now it's an AI bot trying to answer everything. But that said, I think there's still an opportunity for AI to come in and do a big sweep. Like, I know none of your teams are doing this exactly, but if you could imagine a product that did this, what would it do for you?
Yeah, I think what we're really trying to do, especially around knowledge-based articles and AI, is sort of find some sort of middle ground, right? Because I've seen in my last company and even at this company, it's really hard to keep your knowledge base sort of up to date. And, I'm sure that everybody sort of struggles with that. And on the other side of things, we don't want AI sort of just like answering or creating all of it. And so what we're sort of building out literally like right now is trying to find ways to use AI to sort of supplement the process. So how can we come up with some sort of style guide for what we want our articles to look like and have AI sort of enforce that? So we're writing the knowledge-based articles and we can sort of delegate the whole team to write the knowledge-based articles, whether you work on support or not, and then sort of feed that into AI and say, does this adhere to our style guide of when we use headers, when we use screenshots, when we use numbered lists, those kinds of things, to sort of like make that process faster and more agile without sort of like selling it off all to AI and without it becoming stagnant. So I think that's sort of like the middle ground, not committing to either way, be committing.
Amazing. Any last questions before we start closing things up? And we'll be in this room. We have this room for another, few minutes if you guys want to chat after as well and ask any particular questions. But any questions for our panel as a whole before we start closing things up? Final question.
Yeah, one last one, and thank you guys for your time. But one question about assigning customer or even account health scores to pretty much any record in your database that allows you to just really quickly determine how a customer or account is interacting with you. Have you guys thought about implementing something like that if you haven't already?
Yeah, I can probably speak to this. So what we noticed is lots of tools out there that, or even, your own kind of formulas to assign account health scores. And a lot of the time they're based on frequency of communication and also who you're communicating with. And what a lot of these tools are lacking are Slack data. And so what you'll notice in, sort of these CSP type tools are, you'll see an account is bright red, high risk, and executive leadership will come down to the CSM and say, hey, why is this account red? Why don't you ever talk to this person? And it turns out they are talking every day. It's just in Slack. And so Slack is actually, in my opinion, I'm biased, I think it's one of the best indicators of account health. If you're communicating in Slack, it means that customer at least is attempting to use the product. Even if it's negative feedback, it's still a positive indicator if they are writing in your Slack channel. And so it's something that we really emphasize with our own team. We have about 600 Slack channels with customers, and also with our own customers who work in Slack channels. And something we help them with is actually getting those Slack interactions out of Slack and into their source of truth, whether it be like Salesforce or Vitally or other types of solutions like that, because that is a huge indicator for health that is often missed. And you'll give your leadership teams a heart attack sometimes when they think you're completely silent, when in reality it's just all in Slack.
Well, amazing. I'm going to give you guys one more round of applause because with that, really the only thing I have left to show you guys is there is a QR code here. If you are not yet a Slack Pro user, this is 50% off the first 3 months as part of showing up. So you can find that at slack.com community events. Please come join our next community events. Let us know what you guys think of this event in the hashtag #MembersNYC. And as well as tell us what else you'd like to see. If there's any other content you're interested in, we'd be excited to host an event. So again, thank you all. We really appreciate it. We'll all be around here, but for everyone online, we're about to head out. So thank you again. And we will see you all at the next one.
Grab some cookies.